Hi, everyone. Barry McGuire here. It's Thursday. It's 5 o'clock, so it must be live at 5 time for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education Group, devoted to all things real estate, especially investment real estate. Today, we're doing another in our series of what we call field trips. I'm at Field Law. We're doing a field trip. Everybody loves a field trip, if you'll cast your mind back to when you were in school. I just thought it was kind of a catchy name. I don't know. I'm fighting with the guys at the firm. There might be a little. Anyway, we're doing a field trip today. And today we're going to talk about corporations. The single biggest question that we ever get asked as lawyers from folks who are in real estate, whether they are just getting started, and that's a really serious consideration for people when they're just getting started. Maybe when they've accumulated a few properties, certainly when they're looking to be into multifamily properties, certainly when they have a business that's throwing off other money, they have good business income and they want to use some of that business income to purchase properties. Up pops the question, should I incorporate? What kind of a structure do I need? How should we set this up? And so to help us out today here, I've got my colleague, Lyndon Thiessen. Lyndon and I were at RMLO together. Now we're at Field together. Lyndon has been a corporate/tax lawyer for not quite as long as I have, but for a good long time. He has a ton of experience. He handles affairs for about 1,000, that's right, 1,000 corporations. So he knows his way around the corporate block. And so, without any further ado, we're gonna get Wayne to bring up Lyndon, and there he is.
Hey, Barry.
There he is.
Hi.
Lyndon, how the heck are you?
Hey, I'm great. I'm really good. How's things going over there?
Oh, it's not bad. I'm sitting in my kitchen. That's my microwave in the background, and a little wine rack in the. So today, Lyndon, we're doing a field trip, as you heard, and you and I, over the years, I don't know if we had, $10 for everybody who said, should I incorporate? Then we'd have a substantial pile of cash, because that is a big question. Or am I wrong on that? Do you ever hear that question?
All the time. And actually, it still always brings a smile to my face, because it's the right place to start. It's about the foundation upon which you're building, right? So
it's a valid question.
Absolutely. And like a lot of questions in life, there's no one set answer that fits for everybody. Depends who you are and what your goals are and what you have going on.
Well, this is a perfect question for lawyers. So if there's any question to which the answer is it depends, then there's stuff for us to dig our teeth into, and we like to do that. So Lyndon, I know that there's lots of different things that you can say about it, but I think we hear this question the most from folks who have investigated real estate as a strategy, a money-making or life-building strategy that they want to put some time into, and they're just kind of investigating. They're just getting started, and they know that there is this thing called a corporation. They know some people have them, and so folks getting started seem to be really, really concerned. They don't own any properties yet. They're not quite sure where they're going. So let's start with that group. If it's a brand new person, doesn't bought a property, but that's all we know about them, and they say, Lyndon, should I incorporate? What do you say?
Well, usually what I start with is a discussion, and you'll actually hear some themes that are kind of common regardless of who I'm talking to. The question is, first of all, the question of vision and a business plan. Is the dream to buy one property? Is it to buy 3 properties? Is it 10 properties or 20 properties or 100 properties? It's a little bit like asking me, I need a vehicle that's going to get me from A to B. And the question is, okay, where are you trying to get to? Because if it's just literally down the block, well, maybe a scooter will do. But if we're actually going to go on a highway, maybe we're going to go off-roading. Are we driving to Calgary? Are we driving all the way to the coast? So, the question is, I need to know where you're trying to get to. A couple other considerations that fit in are, the question of where is your funding coming from? Is it just in your personal name, in your personal checking account? You have no need for money from anyone, and you've just got it sitting there, and you're going to buy these properties with cash, or do you need financing? Is it coming? Is it coming from a business where that you otherwise own and control? Is that business owned or operated through a corporation? Those are some of the relevant things that I want to know, because they all relate to tax efficiency and also, some very practical considerations about, okay, where's the money coming from? So tax efficiency is always a question that we look at. Another one is also asset protection. What are you comfortable risking? Some people, and absolutely no judgment, if we're starting off with someone who's buying their first property, it doesn't, I still need to know, well, what do they actually have? If a person has substantial net worth, buying a corporation or, using a corporate structure to acquire real estate might be one of the simplest forms of insurance that a person can possibly obtain. On the other hand, if you don't have anything and you have nothing to lose, well, then maybe, there's some dialogue about maybe you want to stick your toe in the water, to try out this real estate investing thing and see if it works for you. And then if it does, kind of advance to the next level. So,
well, that's a good, solid set of kind of questions and parameters that you can throw around, as you said, that to a lot of different situations. They don't just apply to the newbie. I mean, anybody who comes to see you, you're going to have a version of that conversation with them. So. And so I kind of like that, the asset protection as well as the tax efficiency side of it. So now when we're talking tax efficiency, tax is complicated. I recall a tax practitioner telling me that the new tax act, the new simplified tax act had come out. And I think what he said was that the new simplified act and the kind of digest that they get, it's not just the act, but it's the act plus all of the relevant cases, it was up to 1,800 pages from 1,500 pages when it wasn't simplified. So he thought that was real progress. And I shook my head and went, yeah, you tax guys, I tell you. So tax is complicated, and when we talk about the tax efficiency side of things, we all know that the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, lives to stop us from saving tax. I mean, the minute a smart guy like you or a tax practitioner figures out some way that we can avoid tax, some perfectly legal maneuver where we can arrange our affairs to avoid tax, as soon as we do that, they're looking for ways to stop us from doing that. So, I mean, and it's a continual battle back and forth, isn't it? I mean, is it still though relevant on the tax efficiency side of things to incorporate, despite what CRA is always trying to do to us?
Well, the question is, there have been a lot of changes in the recent years, and to be perfectly clear, I'm not even really properly a tax lawyer. Field here, we're blessed. We have a tax team. We have a whole tax group that services all these kinds of questions. Sometimes my role is just to be able to ask the question and look at whether tax efficiency is relevant. Again, it very much depends on who the taxpayer is. Is the individual young? Is the individual 80 years old? Again, where does the income come from? Even where is the real estate that's being purchased? Where is it located? Right now, there's quite a lot of people that are asking us about investing in the United States. And again, fortunately, our tax group has some expertise that deals with cross-border tax issues. And also, there are Americans that are coming into Canada that are also investing in Canada. So, yeah, so that whole question, there really isn't a one-size-fits-all. Federal government is also changing the tax rates. And to be clear, it's when you're talking about investing in real estate, and not to go down the rabbit hole of tax planning too much, but there's two kinds of tax. I mean, there's income that you're earning on the property year to year to year, if it's a passive hold. There's also tax when you dispose of that real property, when you sell it. There's capital gains. And so there's even the question of tax efficiency. There's a number of different kinds of income, and it depends what your goals are. I mean, if you're doing flips, where you buy a property with the intention of selling it in the almost immediate future, that can be treated as active income. And depending on how many flips you're doing, using a corporation might be a great idea, because corporations get taxed on active income at a much lower rate. On the other hand, yeah, if you're just holding on to properties and you're going to stockpile 10 properties and over time sell them, a different plan may fit.
Yes, that's a good point. In our group, we have quite a number of people whose strategy is the fix and flip. They buy it, they fix it, they sell it, they take their profit, and they move on to the next project. So, at active business income, that's quite a lower tax rate, isn't it, than the passive side?
Yeah, and it's a flat rate. So again, if you're doing that through a corporation, the tax, whether you make $50,000, $100,000, $500,000, I think the limit is where the tax rate starts to change is at the $500,000 level. You pay the same amount of tax. Now that profit is in a corporate structure, but it makes a big difference, and it can make a big difference. So.
I had a thought while you were saying that, and I don't want to lose the thought. I'm kind of skipping right to the end of all of our folks in this group have had successful real estate careers, and they've accumulated vast swaths of property, and now they're looking to exit and enjoy the fruits of their labors. And somebody has a $5 million portfolio, which wouldn't take that much. And if they've got a portfolio with, say, $5 million worth of equity in it, and it's time to exit, can they do anything else other than just sell the properties and pay the tax? Or is there something to be done on the planning side when somebody's reached that level of success? And if so, what do they need to do with respect to you?
Well, happily, the answer is yes. There's lots of things that can be done. And again, it depends a little bit on a person's goals and objectives. Sometimes people that have accumulated wealth, their goal is to pass it on to the next generation. Sometimes people's goals are to enjoy the fruits of their labors and to spend it. Other people have charitable interests, and they want to benefit the larger community. So it really depends on that. Now, I'm a huge fan of planning. With planning, I always believe there comes an opportunity. If nothing else, if really there's nothing that can be done, at least you're informed and educated about what the tax bill will be, so that when you're setting that price, then you have a realistic idea of what your net proceeds are going to be. And of course, as I said, if you're selling in a corporation, that doesn't mean that there's just one level of tax. That money is still in the corporate structure. And if you want to use it to buy a cabin or go on a worldwide trip or buy a house, that would involve getting those funds into your personal name, which again attracts another layer of tax. Just recently, I had an example where a family reached out. There's 2 generations involved, and they've owned a property for close to 20 years. And now they're starting to at least weigh whether they should be selling or whether they should keep. And obviously, with the pandemic and the economy, there's lots of different voices as to what people should do. And so we started looking at it, and one of the things we realized is that the parents, if heaven forbid, and of course, hopefully nothing would ever happen, but if they both passed away, there would actually be 3 levels of tax. And when our tax group was calculating the level of tax, it came close to 70%.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so it was like, okay, like, thank goodness we're asking those questions. And so from that very basic question of should we hold, should we sell, I wonder what the tax would be. All of a sudden, we realized that we needed, just to avoid any possibility of hitting 3 levels of tax, we needed to take some steps fairly quickly. And right away, like I think we've, again, we're still finalizing the plan, but it looks like the worst case scenario would be around 37%. Which by my math is about half, not just, just over. And we're not done yet. And so we're going to try and drive that down. And so, again, with planning comes an opportunity. Yeah.
I like that. I like it that if you're at that rarefied stage where you've really accumulated a lot of assets, if you can't do anything, if there is just nothing to be done, at least looking at it tells you how much tax you're going to have to pay, which is an important consideration going forward. But for people also to realize that there are different things you can do if you want to have your family carry on, if you want to just kind of retire and have the money available to you, or if you want to do something charitably. Those are all different planning steps that they do take some professional time and expertise to put those things together. But Lyndon, this reminds me of the file that you had when we were at RMLO together, and I recall you stomping around the office with steam coming out of your ears one day. And when we sat down to talk about what was bothering you, you said to me that your clients, who I believe were 2 couples, had come to you to talk about disposing of their real estate assets. And, they were planning to do it in a couple of years. And so that's another thing. When I'm done this, I want you to touch on timing and how that affects things.
Sure.
Just a little bit more than what I'm doing. But they came to see you. They laid it all out in front of you. You worked with our tax experts, and you came up with a plan that was going to save them $2 million on their tax bill from what their normal bill would have been had they not put some planning into place. And they went, "Oh, Lyndon, they were effusive in their praise. This is so great, man. You're the best. What a genius, et cetera, et cetera." And then they went away and talked to the brother-in-law, who was an accountant, and decided that they were going to wait. And they just went away. And they showed up 2 years later, about the time that they said they were going to dispose of the properties, and said, "Okay, Lyndon, we're ready to put that plan into place." And you said to them, "Folks, time is important in planning." And yes, we were able to help them, and yes, we were able to do something, but the savings were not now $2 million. It was $800,000 because they didn't pay attention to the timing side of it. So I just want you to add to that and talk to people about how important the time element is in pre-planning when you're trying to get to a result.
Yeah, as always, with time, there are more opportunities to use and fit within the rules of the Income Tax Act. Like you said, the Tax Act is a treatise beyond treatise. It's massive, it's complicated. People spend their lives studying it and trying to understand it and interpret it. And so if we have time, then the tax planning process, we can structure things, and sometimes it takes multiple steps over time to put the pieces in place so that when you're ready to sell, we can present to the buyer, okay, this is what's for sale, and here's the price, and here's why this is the price. And we've already figured out the tax treatment and exactly. So, yeah, the short answer is, especially if there's any kind of element of a sale of business that's involved, um, not that we can't do something if the notice is shorter, but ideally, if we have 2 years, then I'm not stomping around. I'm smiling, and it's not nearly so stressful. I think it's in my genetics to basically, where possible, within the bounds of what's appropriate under the Tax Act, to plan so that tax efficiency is, the transactions are as tax efficient as possible. And corporations are a big part of that. Sometimes people ask me about family trusts and how that fits in terms of tax planning. And I can tell you that because under the Tax Act, the TOSI rules, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with that, but there are rules now that, depending on when a business corporation earns income, there are limits or rules around when you're going to distribute profit to family members that are not actively involved in that corporation. And so, and sometimes those restrictions and those attribution rules are really significant. And so, again, a basic fundamental of tax planning is, if we have more taxpayers, each taxpayer is eligible or entitled to a certain number of exemptions or rights, opportunities. And so if we can multiply the taxpayers, then our opportunities for tax planning are growing. And right now, a trust can't own real property in Alberta. So circling back to where we started, when do I need a corporation? Well, sometimes, and we're talking about advanced planning right now. Corporations become really, really central and key in that whole discussion.
Yes, the farther you move up the chain of investing, the more properties you own, the more complicated your family and business life is, the more complicated and wide-ranging your plans are, the more corporations work into the picture. Is that not right?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, to circle back right to your very first question about, do I need to incorporate? Sometimes it also depends on the nature of the property. Some lenders will require the buyers to have an entity to buy the property. And those lenders, have changed their rules from, every 6 months to a year. Some lenders say, banks say, oh, you have to be incorporated. And then 6 months later, it changes. But again, that's another consideration, because if you need mortgage financing and your bank isn't going to give it to you unless you're buying this property in a brand spanking new corporation, well, the decision is made.
Yeah.
And we may as well get on to planning it so that it's the most effective, tax efficient structure. Yeah.
So folks, when Lyndon's talking about this aspect of things, when you are dealing typically with larger properties where you're borrowing more money, maybe you're into the multis or commercial kind of properties, lenders require you to purchase in a corporation, because if they make you do that, then they can make you sign personal guarantees. So on the residential side of mortgaging, there are some ways that we can avoid being caught by foreclosures, but lenders are smart enough to know that once you get up there, it's better for them. At least they think, typically, and almost all the time, it's better for them if they make you incorporate, so they can make you sign personal guarantees. So as Lyndon says, there may not be any consideration about it. If you want to buy the property and borrow from that bank, you're incorporating. So not much choice, at least initially there. But Lyndon, if that situation showed up, someone comes in and consults with you, they've got an active business that throws off a lot of money. They're going to buy a 64 suite apartment building. They've got another, dry cleaning business that they run in another corporation. That's much more complicated than the person who's dipping their toe in the water and thinking of buying their first property. So, are you able to, in this last situation that I talked about, the 64 unit with other businesses, do you just plug along on your own, or what do you do with their existing advisors? Because nobody gets to that investing stage with those many assets without having advisors other than us. So how do you work those other folks into this?
Well, the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes the village. It takes all the professional advisors. And that's one of the places we start. Whether it's the simplest, I'm interested in incorporating my first company, or I have an existing complicated business. One of the very first questions I ask is, who's your accountant? Do you have an accountant that you like and appreciate, that you can understand, that speaks your language, and that is on board with assisting you and supporting you in a proactive way to accomplishing your goals? And so all of that being said, where we have a complicated structure, I won't incorporate a company. I won't lift a finger until I've spoken to the professional advisors to say, hey, for this client, what do you see? What's the good? What's the bad? What's the ugly? What do we need to know? Because I tend to just see things from a legal perspective. These other advisors will see their clients, our mutual clients, from a tax perspective, or maybe an investment perspective, maybe an industry perspective, where maybe, in the last few years in Alberta, oil has been very high, and then it's also hasn't been the greatest. And so, again, all of those voices are needed. Even on the simplest front, a corporation, I kind of chuckle when people go, oh yeah, I just need a simple corporation. Nothing to it. And no need to talk about it. And then, well, I usually find, okay, wait a sec. So who's going to own it? And, even if it's a husband-wife situation or two partners, okay, should you guys have the same class of shares or not? Are you both going to be directors? Well, what's a director? Are you both going to be involved in the business? Are you both going to be actively engaged? Or is one of you going to be in Hong Kong or traveling? I mean, pre-pandemic. What is the business plan? What's the model? Who's going to be actively engaged in operating and making decisions for this corporation? And all of those things need to be taken into consideration in terms of organizing the corporation, even if you're just starting with your first basic corporation. So.
So when we talk about the team, you say it takes a village, and when we talk in our group here, we always talk about, you need a good solid team. You need a solid realtor and an appraiser and an insurance agent and a mortgage broker and a lawyer and an accountant. So you need all of those people, and you move up the chain and you start talking to advisors. They might have an accountant and a financial planner, and a sophisticated insurance agent to fund some of those sophisticated plans that people can implement as they move farther up the income chain. So, it does take a whole whack of people. And I think if there's one thing we've learned over the years, that there is, as you said, I will not take step one on incorporating until I've spoken to the client's accountant to see whether they're on board with the plan. Because I'm sure you got the odd story about not having that conversation, the accountant then discovers what the plan is, and they're not on board. And so, I mean, have you run into that where the best laid plans got scotched by maybe an accountant's a little too conservative or isn't quite comfortable with the plan but doesn't really want to admit it?
Well, sure. I think the human experience is if things aren't done right the first time, it's always a lot more work and a little bit messy to fix it up. It's like making your favorite recipe a little bit. If you follow step by step by step, and everything is the appropriate ingredient, you put it all together, you end up hopefully with something that's delicious and that you're looking forward to eating. But I've experienced, unfortunately, where I think, oh, this ingredient, I don't have it. I don't need to go to the store. I'll just substitute this other ingredient. And I seem to remember doing that with ginger instead of garlic. And I put in a healthy dose of ginger, and it was not edible. And of course, I'd used all my precious ingredients, and so I had to start right back to the start, and I had to go to the store anyways, and I couldn't find everything, and I ended up very hungry and a little bit grumpy. But the point is, so here's again an example. When we're incorporating a company, one of the questions that clients are asked is, well, in whose name should we issue the shares? And sometimes clients will say, oh, in my name. Of course, my name. And well, if you talk to the accountant, I don't need to, just my name. So then 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, the accountant hears about it and says, no, 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 no. This is really tax inefficient. This isn't a good thing. We need this changed. Okay, well, what's involved in changing? Well, it depends who in the meantime has heard and we've reported to or opined on, well, it's John or Mary that owns these shares. Oh, wait, it's not them, it's their corporation. So now all of a sudden we have to inform lenders. Security may need to be amended. And if we've filed annual returns, I mean, there's ethics involved, it's complicated, and we're redoing paperwork, and it's expensive. It's really expensive. And it's the kind of work that fixing unnecessary mistakes just doesn't bring a lot of joy. We're all busy and would rather keep things efficient, keep legal costs down, keep things moving in the right direction. And when we have to go backwards, it really feels like we're taking steps backwards, and no one ends up happy in that. So the idea is plan, communicate, talk, figure it out, do it once, do it right, and then get on with the business of talking to real estate lawyers like you. I mean, if clients are talking to me too much after we've set up the structure, that's a whole nother issue. We want them talking to the real estate guys. So.
Let's acquire some real estate. All right. So Lyndon, this is a question and answer session as well. And as always, this question of should I incorporate generates lots and lots of questions. So we're going to stop this kind of chat a bit sooner than we normally would because there are lots of questions. So let's dive into that part of it, and then if there's more time left at the end, we'll have more conversation. But let's get Wayne to pop us up what he thinks is maybe the appropriate order of questions, and you and I will look at them, and I'll sit and drink water while you answer them, because I think that's the best way to. All right, what does Tim say? When is the best time to add a property to a corporation? At purchase or after the transaction has been completed? Ooh, that's a good one, Tim.
All right. So if a person knows that the end destination is to have the property owned by a corporation, it is always the simplest, most direct path to put it into the corporate name right from the start. If you have mortgage financing, of course, any kind of change to who owns the property subsequent to the purchase would need the lender's consent. And depending on your lender, you know, lots of lenders will say no. We lend to you personally, so we want the property held by you personally. And we gave you a loan and interest rate based on you owning it personally and the risk level associated with you personally. If you are going to transfer it into a corporation, at the very least, we're going to charge you another fee. We're going to amend our security, and that's the best case scenario. So if you know when you're acquiring the property, short answer, that you want to put it in a corporation, do it right at the start.
Yeah. So that's part of that initial planning that you do to figure out where you want the properties to be, and where's the best place for them to be, which is another. I don't want to go down the financing path here, because there's lots of considerations on how banks look at you when you show up and say, I want to buy property and I want to incorporate. There's questions around interest rates. There's questions around guarantees. There's lots of questions in there, apart from all of the things that we're talking about. But I agree, if you know it's going to end up in a corporation, and all the rest of the pieces fit together, then let's get it in there right away. All right, Doug Robertson. Doug out on the East Coast. There he is. Doesn't he look happy? Doug from Digby. Doug says, I already have several properties, 2 on an RTO, that's a rent to own contract. If I was to incorporate now, would I or could I roll the properties into the corporation? What do you think?
So there, in general, it is possible to take properties that you own personally and roll them into a corporation on a tax-deferred basis. It is possible. There's an exception that you would need to fit within. And there are very strict, complicated rules about what you have to do in order to avoid paying that tax. Now, that tax is not eliminated, it's deferred. And so the short answer is, if the question is, should you? Well, again, that's a very personal question, but could you? Yes, indeed, you can. Now, again, like I said, before we would do that, we'd want to ensure that we have the consent of your lender. Obviously, if the title is free and clear, you don't need to worry about getting consent from a lender. You can just go ahead and do your thing. One other comment I'd make is, I say with a smile on my face, folks, don't try this at home by yourselves. Get legal help. Sometimes I get contacted by people that say, well, I own this property personally, and I just transferred it into a corporation, and it was really easy. And now CRA is bothering me about this tax bill, and of course they're wrong, so fix it. And again, after the fact, it's very complicated.
So this is kind of the mid-level conversation, isn't it? We started at the beginning talking about someone who's just looking to buy their first property, and then someone who's a little farther up the chain already owns some properties. This is Doug's situation. He already owns some properties. So you still have to have that where are we going with this conversation that you talked about? And then if all the other pieces fit, yes, you can roll those personally owned into the corporation. So yeah, it is complicated and you do need some legal help, but generally speaking, it can be done. So let's get on to the next question. Hope that's good for you, Dad. Alona says, when qualifying for commercial mortgages, a mortgage using a corporation, is it possible to take the personal guarantee out in 5 years? I'm not sure if it's a question for a commercial mortgage broker. Oh, don't worry about that, Alona. We can handle that. We don't need those stinking commercial mortgage brokers. No, I didn't mean that. Seriously. I know there's probably some commercial brokers listening. They might have a different idea. Maybe I've misspoken myself. now that I've ran off at the mouth, Lyndon?
So the short answer is depends on your lender. Very much depends on your circumstances, depends on their assessment of risk. And sometimes, depending on the strength of your loan commitment, maybe you can negotiate that. In this economy, I don't see this often. And typically, at best, I see lenders giving a commitment to at least review the personal guarantee security, maybe with a view to reducing it over time. Typically, when you get a loan, and let's say there's a 15-year amortization period, the first few years, obviously, the lender has the most at risk. The lender is going to hold on to that personal guarantee the tightest. If you're 5 or 10 years, and again, it depends on the facts. If you're 5 years into a 10-year term loan, yeah, maybe a lender would consider reducing the personal guarantee from 100% to 50%. It may not be, again, all or nothing. Doesn't mean you can't try.
Yeah. And I wonder if a different yardstick for this, or another just view of this situation, would be, you and I worked on a transaction just recently where our client was so proud on his $3 million purchase that he'd negotiated a loan without any personal guarantees. So he was purchasing in a corporation, $3 million purchase and no personal guarantees. And you and I went, wow, that's unheard of. And then what did he tell us? Do you recall what he told us the loan to value ratio was in terms of how much money is he putting up against the purchase price?
Yeah, I mean, like he was putting up at least 50% loan to value. And you're right. And he was openly had agreed to paying a higher interest rate, quite a bit higher, all with a view to avoiding that personal guarantee. So again, part of the business decision, not so much a legal decision, but the business decision is, what is the risk of failure and what are you prepared to risk? And if you're not prepared to risk anything, probably the lender is going to be quite aware of that too, and may actually be thinking of it in the same way you are, except from the opposite end of the spectrum. So the lender wants, obviously, the word security, the lender wants to feel secure. The lender doesn't want to feel like it's going to be left holding the bag while its borrower walks away smiling. So,
all right.
Yeah.
So that's a good one. There's certainly room to talk about in there. You can do things. And well, Ilona, there you are. Maybe Linda can explain why personal guarantee is a must when doing the commercial financing route. I think we kind of touched on that, but we can just repeat.
Sure. I mean, it's all about what the lender feels is necessary so that they are secure. And the lenders typically have corporate finance lawyers that are very, very sophisticated and well-versed in what corporations offer in terms of protection. And so lenders don't want risk. They're well aware of this, and they want their buyers to be committed, not just in word, but they want to know that the borrower's assets, wherever possible, are also at risk, because that, of course, by definition, improves the likelihood that the borrower will honor the commitment. So
the other piece that fits in there is that lenders and their lawyers are very well aware that the protection of this law called the Law of Property Act is a piece of legislation in Alberta, especially for Alberta. It's called the Law of Property Act, and it says that if you have a non-CMHC loan and if you're borrowing in your personal name, then if the loan goes bad, all the bank can do is take away the property. They sell the property and don't get enough to pay back their loan, their mortgage, they can't come after you for what they call the deficiency. So one of the reasons they say we have to put this in a corporation is because that legislation doesn't apply if the property is owned in a corporation. You don't get that protection of the Law of Property Act. So they go, okay, great, let's make them buy in a corporation. And not only is that specific legislation missing, but also we can nail them for personal guarantees. So we got them on both ends. So that's, Alona, that's why.
Mm-hmm.
Next. Facebook user, we're at the beginning of our investing career. We would like to plan for passing our real estate assets to the next generation. Should we look at a corporate structure or a family trust? Oh, good one.
Typically, the short answer is both, because as I indicated, if a family trust is the right structure, and we can briefly touch upon what a family trust is, a family trust in itself cannot own real property, real estate. It can't have the title. And the tax rates in family trusts are very, very high. And so almost, I think without exception, I don't know of any of our clients that have family trusts that own their real estate within the trust. They own it in a corporation that in turn is owned and controlled, at least in part, by the trust. So
that was a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
Doug says, does a corporation relieve me of personal liability?
Good question. So in law, a corporation is a separate legal entity from the people that own it. And so in fact, a court will recognize a corporation just like it would recognize Barry or I as a separate person in its courtroom. Now, obviously, a corporation is a legal fiction that's created through statute, and it can't speak. It can't act on its own. It needs human beings to act. And so there's this concept called directors who are legally responsible for being kind of the mind and body and acting force of a corporation. And so directors actually, in some situations, can attract personal liability. Well, what situations are those? Well, in short, and again, appreciate that we're summarizing great amounts of statute and complicated ideas into a few words and sentences. But generally, there's two kinds of liability that directors can attract. One is under statute. So the classic example is GST. If you have a corporation that's been collecting GST and then you choose not to remit it to the government, GST technically isn't owned, it's always the government's money. But the legislation is quite clear that directors have personal liability for remitting those funds. And you can't say, well, I didn't do it. My corporation didn't do it. So CRA, Department of Justice, you can chase my corporation, but you can't chase me. I'm only the director. The legislation says no, directors are responsible. Another kind of liability that directors can attract is what I would say is the non-legislative obligations that a director has, or fiduciary obligations. And fiduciary obligations are duties of care that directors have to the public or to the other people that the directors are dealing with. A couple quick examples. If you have a duty to act in good faith, to not use the corporation in almost a bad faith way of taking advantage of the general public. the example I like to give sometimes is if someone was awarded a contract and in order to, you had a letter of intent, and this contract required you to have 10 computers, and you immediately went out and bought the 10 computers on credit for your corporation. And then, as it turns out, you don't get awarded the contract. The question is, did you act reasonably, carefully, so that you wouldn't take advantage of someone? If when you bought those computers, you bought those computers based on a mere phone call, an expression of interest. Maybe, hey, Lyndon, maybe we'll give you this contract, and if we do, we'll need 10 computers. Well, then arguably, I shouldn't act in such a way that unsuspecting members of the public are harmed. If, on the other hand, I have a signed, sealed, and delivered contract that's rock solid, and I go buy the computers in my corporate name, well, then maybe arguably I shouldn't be responsible for it. My corporation still will be, but not me personally. Anyway, long, complicated answer. The general rule is corporations are responsible for themselves, unless there's some other circumstance which basically the law says, either by statute or through some duty of care, they say that the directors should have been more careful, so to ensure that people weren't harmed.
Well, that's a good answer. I guess that brings up the question of directors' insurance and what sort of a policy they should have and what it might cover, and would it cover things where they were just careless, or would it cover them if they were fraudulent, or do they just have to have made an honest mistake? And directors' insurance is another serious question for folks with a corporation to get answered.
I should just point out that the duty of care that directors are held to, directors are allowed to make mistakes. But there's a fine line. And I had a law professor once say the difference is if you told the whole story to your grandmother, all the facts, not just the ones you want her to hear, but you told all the facts, would your grandmother be upset with you or not? And if your grandmother would be upset with you, well, then you, as a director, probably have personal liability. And I realize that's a big simplification, but the old gut test actually is more accurate than you might imagine.
Okay, we've got a question from Harry. Harry says, I'm just going to read it out because we might need a little supplementary here, Harry. What would the personal guarantees be for that bank would want you to do? So I'm not quite sure what that means. What would the personal guarantees be for that bank would want you to do? Why are they there? Maybe are you asking why are those personal guarantees there? What is the bank trying to protect with making you provide a personal guarantee? Well, if that's what your question is, and you can mull that over. So I guess, Lyndon, maybe we can say, what is the purpose of the personal guarantee, and we'll see if we're hitting what Harry means.
Sure. Yeah, the purpose of the personal guarantee is to give the bank additional security, additional comfort that its interest, the likelihood of it getting repaid is higher. It's not just the corporation that is responsible to repay the debt. A personal guarantee can be for a set amount, a limited amount, or it can be unlimited. And so a personal guarantee, depending on the terms of it, will make a person individually responsible for the debts of the corporation as it relates to that particular loan. Not all debts of the corporation, just for that particular loan.
So folks, when we talk about personal guarantees and mortgages and lenders, I'm pretty sure you all understand this, but I'll just say it anyways, is lenders do their very best to get every bit of security that they possibly can from you. And from their perspective, that just makes good business sense. And that limits their risk to take every bit of security they can. And so sometimes you have the ability to negotiate fewer bits of security, and sometimes you don't. Now, if you're Bill Gates, you can probably, first off, you don't need the loan. But if you're Bill Gates and you do need a loan, you're likely to be able to get much better terms than if any of us need a loan. So banks want to get everything they can out of you. All right. If a corporation is set up to have 3 rental, individual-owned, single-house properties transferred in, okay, so I'm guessing you already own those 3 properties and you want to move them into the corporation. Will lenders treat it as professional investors with their financing based on the asset's cash flow, rent versus mortgage payment, rather than an individual debt ratio? I'm hoping that Sean Impey or some other knowledgeable finance guy might be on the call tonight, because I kind of think this is more of a lender broker question than it is a Lyndon or Barry question. Sean, are you on the call? And if not, Lyndon and I will take a crack at it. Bit of a delay. Okay, so maybe we'll just leave that question to the side for the moment. We'll come back to that one and try and look at Al's question here. Al says, what if you have a corporation but you own the revenue properties in person? All right, so you have a corporation but the titles are in your personal name. Is it beneficial to move it over to a corporation? We're talking 4 doors now, down from 10. So Al, you used to own 10, now you own 4. You're wondering, should I move them into the corporate name? Lyndon?
I mean, it depends a little bit on what the end goal is. If the end goal is you're going to continue to sell the 4 remaining properties as soon as you're able, or even in the next few years, the goal being not to necessarily try to hold them for the next 20 years, then probably I would say no. I'm not sure it would be beneficial to move it into a corporation, because there's a certain level of costs. Again, we talked about obtaining the lender's consent. I'm not sure it would be worth it at that point, because it sounds like you're winding down. You're at the tail end of your investment journey.
Okay, let's. Ilona says you were very helpful. Oh, well, isn't that good? So you're not just a pretty face putting it on for the group. You actually are like this when people talk to you. Is that right? He is like this, folks. Lyndon's a charming, friendly, knowledgeable guy who can really help you with all things related to corporations. He can certainly help you on the tax side with our tax team. There's lots going on, and he really is just like this. So, yeah, you're not a fake. It's not a fake Lyndon.
What you see is what you get.
Yeah.
Messy everything. There you go.
What's Doug say? Are corporations set up for individual province or Canada-wide? Oh, that's a good one, Doug.
Really good question. So the short answer is both. Okay, lawyers, right? Always never a simple answer. It's always complicated. So each province you can incorporate in each province. And if you have a corporation in a province, let's say someone incorporates in Alberta, and you decide, hey, I want to buy a property in Saskatchewan or Manitoba or Ontario, we can take the Alberta corporation and we can what's called extra provincially register it in the province where you want the same corporation to own real estate in. So that's one way of having a corporation that is a provincial corporation, that one way to have that provincial corporation own real estate in more than one province. There's another alternative, and that is you can incorporate a federal corporation, and the federal corporation, and if you hear me, if what I say doesn't make sense, you're actually hearing it correctly. A federal corporation is entitled to carry on business everywhere in Canada, but in no particular province. Now you might say that makes no sense. Why, Lyndon? Why would the law do that? And it's actually a constitutional question. And, and it goes right back to the provinces were able to, carrying on business was in the jurisdiction of the provinces. But there are some undertakings that are federal in nature. And so the federal government quite appropriately has the entity under the Canada Business Corporations Act. We can incorporate corporations federally. The short answer is typically federal corporations are more expensive to incorporate and also to maintain than provincial corporations. But if you're Walmart or some large entity that needs to operate in all the various provinces, then the way to do it and the way to protect your name is to have a federal entity. If you're a small entrepreneur buying your first or second or fifth piece of real estate, there's no reason, in my view, to incur the cost of having a federal entity.
All right. Well, in answering Doug's question, looks like we answered Robin's question as well. So we're coming back to this question that we were going to defer to our mortgage broker Sean Impey. Let's read it again and see if we can help a little bit. And if we can, great. If not, we'll make sure that we get Sean on this and we'll get you an answer at a different time. But let's look at it. If a corporation is set up to have 3 individually owned single house properties transferred in, will lenders treat it as professional investors with their financing based on the assets, cash flow, rent as other than individual debt ratio? Okay, so this is a reference to commercial mortgages where the lender is really far more interested in what cash flow the property is throwing off rather than who the individual is and how much money they're earning at their job. So the how lenders look at that is individual to lenders. But all the lenders aren't the same. They have different policies and they have different ways of looking at things. And some of them, some lenders are much more interested in folks who own real estate and much more interested in setting them up on the commercial side of lending, where the rules are quite different and where you're able to accumulate more properties in a commercial situation than you are in a residential situation. On the residential side, we all know at the 3, 4, 5 mortgage mark, depending on who you are and what lender you're working with, lenders shut the door on you and they say you can't borrow, you can't get any more mortgages, so you can't buy any more properties on the residential side. But if you move it over to the commercial side, it's really all about the cash flow. Really, there's way more room to expand. You have to often pay a little bit more interest, but that's a small peccadillo if you are a person with a real estate plan and you're looking to acquire a lot of properties. You pretty much have to be over on the commercial side. So I think we've at least partially answered that question. So I'm going to leave that one for now. And Facebook user, you can get back to us if you want Sean to carry on. Tracy says, we've heard a lot of pros for incorporated. Now we have Alberta relaunch grant. If you're incorporated, you have access to more government help. Any cons if you do it too early? Gee, I'd have to say I'm not up on my the recent rules for government assistance, either without COVID or with COVID. Every day there's more conversations about help for people whose businesses are going in the tank because of COVID. So I'm no help on this one, Lyndon. What about you?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the relaunch grants as well. So, generally, the question of whether someone should incorporate, typically that decision would not depend alone on whether you qualify for a relaunch grant. Certainly it'd be worth looking into if that's a really relevant consideration. In my experience, people that are needing to recalibrate or refocus their energies so that they can make a living and survive, those really significant needs are driving the bus, so to speak, and they don't have the luxury of waiting. If truly they need to incorporate, then they're doing it.
Good point. All right. Well, that wasn't a really expansive answer there, Tracy, but it's the best we've got on it right now. Sean Impey, what the heck? How would a bare trust come into play if properties are owned personally, pro and con? Sean, that's the subject of one whole hour's conversation, and you're throwing that in just to be a troublemaker. I just know it. No, Sean's throwing that in because he gets asked this question all the time, and it is a big question. It is a big question for people. So, Lyndon, I'll kind of start out on that one.
Sure.
So the bare trust shows up when people own a property personally. Generally, they own a property personally, or they're able to acquire properties personally, but they can't acquire in their corporation. However, for their own reasons, they want to run all their income and actually have their corporations be in control and report for tax purposes on these properties. So what they do is they buy personally, and I always recommend that they make sure they tell their mortgage broker or their lender what their plan is, full disclosure. They buy personally, and then they set up a corporation, and in conjunction with a lawyer and their accountant, they create a bare trust agreement that says that the individual whose name the title is holding the property in trust for that corporation. So that's what a bare trust is, very briefly, and it's always set up in terms or in conjunction with an accountant. It's one of those classic questions. Lyndon talked about always getting the accountant involved. You certainly have to get your accountant involved if you're planning to do something like this. So I guess one of the pros is that for your own reasons, it's better for you to be reporting income and running the properties through your corporation. I mean, that's a pro of doing it. Otherwise, what's the point? On the con side of things, I think unless you set it up right, you can get yourself in trouble with the CRA if this is not really done according to the rules. So that's my short take on it. Lyndon, what about you?
Yeah, I would just add to it. You can also get yourself in a lot of trouble with your lender. You said something, that if you're going to do this, the idea is to do it with full disclosure to your lender about what your plans are. Where people get into a lot of trouble is when you're signing a mortgage, one of the provisions in every mortgage is it says that I am the beneficial and legal owner of the property. Well, beneficial meaning it's in my name and I beneficially own that. You can't properly say that if at the same time you've signed a bare trust, because the bare trust says the title is legally in my name, but I beneficially own it on behalf of the beneficiary, which is my corporation. So you're offside of that, and that could be considered mortgage fraud, which is a really, really serious thing. So obviously the right way to do it is the opposite side of that. And so if you're going to use a bare trust, I would say two critical pieces of advice. First of all, talk to your accountant. Make sure that this is actually what you need. And secondly, talk to Barry or your real estate guy to make sure that legally you can do it, not just because it's a good tax idea, but actually so that you're not getting yourself into hot water.
Yeah, that's a good one. How to mitigate risk if someone has property on Airbnb or student rental or rooming house. So those are, I guess, what you're saying here, Facebook user, is that those are higher risk rental situations. And how do you mitigate your risk? Well, in mitigating risk, the first thing I would say is talk to your insurance agent to see whether or not you can get expanded insurance coverage for these circumstances. And the second thing I would say is I would research really hard on what the downside risks are for those three particular strategies, because they will all have different risks. I see them as being higher risk, but they will all have different risks. And so I would analyze hard for what those extra risks are. And apart from talking to your insurance agent, I would look at those risks and see whether or not you think you understand them, and whether or not you think you're capable of self-mitigating. Do you think that you're capable of, say, let's say on the Airbnb side, you have to watch out for people who are good. They just want to rent your place to have a big party, and maybe they're going to trash it. I mean, are your rental parameters, are the Airbnb parameters rigid or strict or in depth enough so that they can really figure out whether that's what someone is up to, or do you need to do something else? Rooming houses, I mean, those are often you're dealing with folks in a lower socioeconomic bracket, which has its whole own set of challenges, and they're different from renting to people in other socioeconomic brackets. So it's insurance and your own risk assessment, and then figuring out whether you think you can deal with those risks.
I would say too that if it would be a bad idea if you were going to have a rooming house that you knew wasn't legal for the municipality, and if your idea was, well, I'm going to use a corporation, I'm going to have that property owned by a corporation, so that if things blow up, it's not me, it's my corporation that's responsible. I think that would be an example of where a person could have director's liability, where you know that something is offside and you're trying to use the corporate structure, the protection, the liability shield that corporations usually offer. If you're trying to use that improperly when you know it's wrong, I think you're in trouble.
All right, next up. Who's this person called Facebook user? Keeps asking all these questions. I don't know. Anyway, Facebook user, you're full of questions. If you've already purchased 2 or 3 buy and hold condos worth $250,000, $350,000, $250,000, $350,000, which are cash flow moderately, $300 to $400 a month, do you believe it's worth it from a financial perspective to put them in one or a few corporations? Whoa. Well, okay, Lyndon.
So my obviously there are a lot of details that I don't know. My quick answer would be that at most you might consider putting them into one corporation, but before I would proceed on that plan, again, I think you need to have a conversation with your accountant and lawyer to have a conversation to see if it makes sense. Again, it depends just on what your plans are, how much equity. There are a whole bunch of considerations that go into that. Are you have you bought 2 or 3 and now you're done? Or are you buying 2 or 3 and next year you're going to buy another 2 or 3, and the year after you're going to start buying multis? There's no one set answer. It's probably worth a conversation though, and I would be very comfortable with that conversation all day long.
Okay, next up. Saraba Mata says, is it better to have multiple properties under one corporation, or each property should be put under a separate corporation? You know, and Lyndon, this is one that I've heard a lot, and I think you and I both run into people who show up and they've got 3 moderately priced properties, and they have 3 separate corporations, one for each property. I think some of our U.S. gurus, along with teaching that you've got to have a 3-tiered corporation, also say you need a corporation for every property. So I think you kind of already answered this, but may as well just expand on it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of putting one property in each corporation, assuming that it's I don't know, a residential condo that has, I don't know, a value of somewhere between 2 and 500,000. The question in my mind is how much value, how much equity are you comfortable having within one corporation, assuming and knowing that anything in that corporation is also affected in a good way and a bad way by anything else that happens to those other sister properties that are in the same corporation. The analogy is, how many eggs are you comfortable having in your basket? It's true, and each basket is expensive. So, if you have one basket, do you put I think the record I saw was one client had, I think, 80 properties within one corporation. Sounds really good. You had very low overhead, very low, there's just one corporate tax return to file. But if something goes wrong and it affects all of the other properties, that doesn't look like the greatest idea. Yeah, you saved a bunch of money, but you just lost everything. So you know what? There's two extremes, right? You put it all in one corporation, or you put one property. Each property has its own corporation. I'm a big believer in moderation, including moderation. So, I think there needs to be a conversation about, okay, how much are you comfortable risking in one corporation? And for everyone, that value is going to be different. And it also depends on what stage you're at. How much equity is there? So.
All right. What's Harry? Here he is. Harry said in a different note that he got a commercial mortgage without personal guarantees. And Harry, all I can say is good for you. You're a good negotiator. I think we should get Harry to do all our mortgage negotiating for us. But this question is, if you roll over a personal property into a corporation, does it trigger capital gains? That's a fab question. Lyndon.
Yes, it does.
Okay, that's on to the next question. Oh, hold on.
So the question then is, the question is, if you roll over, so if you anytime you transfer any kind of property to a corporation that is owned and controlled by you. So, the question kind of has embedded in it, if I transfer a property I own to a corporation that Barry owns, yes, there's capital gains, there's third parties. If I transfer a property that I own personally into the name of my sister for $1, is there capital gains? The answer is yes. CRA will tax it as though I sold it at fair market value, even though I transferred it to my sister for $1. If I take a property that I own personally and I transfer it into a corporation that I own and control, does it trigger capital gains? Yes, unless it fits within an exemption. And that's what I was talking about. There is complicated but understandable exemption rules that if an individual takes back property of equal value, then you can defer the capital gains tax. Now, again, I'm simplifying complicated concepts, and there's a lot of detail that needs to be covered off, because of course, what is the the fair market value of a property? And there are disclosures and exemptions that need to be filed with CRA in order to avoid triggering this capital gains tax. So again, long story short, don't do it at home, folks. If you're going to transfer a property into a corporation that you own and control, you need legal help, you need tax help. Accountants, lawyers will help you get it done right so that you can defer the tax.
Okay. Deferrals are good. Suzanne says, looks like Suzanne is enthusiastic maybe about asking you to do some work for her, Lyndon, but she's in Ontario, looks like, and you're in Alberta.
Yeah. we're in Alberta. We're based in Western Canada. So the short answer is we can try to pass you on to someone that speaks the same language as what we've been talking about in Ontario. If you're doing something, if you're from Ontario and you want to carry on business in Alberta or Western Canada, then we can help you.
Okay. Karina says, if my incorporated company gets sued by an individual, can that individual go after me or just my incorporated company? And my incorporated company has more than one property under it. So that's onto the liability side of things. So that's always one of the major issues to discuss. Linda.
So the short answer is anyone can sue anyone. So, and I'm not trying to be a smart aleck when I say that, a person can actually try to sue the Queen of England. You can actually go to the law courts and file a claim and say, I'm blaming Barry and the Queen of England side by side. Strange combination, but you could. That doesn't mean, though, that you'll be successful. And there's a big difference between suing someone and then actually being successful and having that lawsuit result in a successful claim and judgment against that person. So it's true, if someone, if an individual sues, has a claim against your, the question is, who does the individual have a proper claim against? Is it against your corporation, or is it against you, or is it against you as a director of the corporation? You see, and that's where sometimes people aren't very clear in terms of what legal hat or what entity, who they're actually acting for. So for example, if you have a rental property that is owned by a corporation and you sign a lease instead of in the name as a landlord, instead of in the name of your corporation, but you sign it personally, who's the landlord? I would say there's confusion at best. If it was me, if I would be able, a sharp litigator would be able to say, well, hold it. You can't pick and choose who's responsible depending on the nature of the claim. You chose to sign a lease in your personal name, so you personally are responsible. And I don't care that the corporation's held by a corporation. So my point is, as a bit of advice, be conscious of who you're representing. On the assumption that all of the paperwork, all the documentation says you're acting off of a corporation, someone can still sue you personally. But the question is, on what basis? And have you done anything personally? No. Then they probably won't be able to maintain that claim against you. If you've acted as a director in bad faith or committed a fraud or misled someone grievously, well, then maybe you have some exposure. Generally not, but who knows? The details matter.
Yeah, folks, as always, there's a lot of it depends when we answer questions. A couple more questions. And so Danielle wonders whether she can estimate the cost involved in creating a corporation. So Lyndon, tell us a bit about someone comes along to see you and they want to create, a two-person corporation. What do you say?
Yeah. So right now, there's always two components to what's it going to cost. The short answer is, because we do this often enough, the short answer is, including GST, we're right around $1,400. That includes all the legal fees, all the disbursements, all the tax. And again, if you want a ballpark, that's what I would say. And that includes most of this, everything we've been talking about, figuring out who the shareholders should be, who the directors should be, how it fits into your structure. That's how we typically, there's a set fee.
So that's the basic, folks. And then it's like going to buy a car. You can buy a basic car, and that's the basic, and it includes a lot of things. I mean, it'll certainly get you from A to B. When you start adding on options, then there are extra costs. You have multiple shareholders. You want a unanimous shareholders agreement. You want to, amalgamate with a different corporation. There's lots of things going on, but most folks start out with that basic corporation, so that's a good solid number for you to plug into a budget. Robin, can we own property in other provinces? So I think Lyndon already answered that. You just want to recap that one, Lyndon?
Yes, if the corporation can be extra provincially registered in those other provinces. So that's something that we would be able to help you with.
Okay, so there's the answer there.
Yeah.
I think we're coming almost to the end, but there might be a few more. Danielle had another. Yeah, I was noticing Danielle's question about can a corporation replace a will, and there's Danielle's question on
a corporation does
here it is. Yeah,
replace a will. So a corporation is owned by way of shares, and so if a shareholder of a corporation passes away, shares are one kind of property that will need to be dealt with under the deceased estate, whether they have a will or not. And there will be tax incurred, whether there's a will or not. And all of the value that's held in the corporate structure, again, it starts to get complicated. The short answer is, in no way does a corporation replace a will. And can be done to pre-plan what would happen if a shareholder dies. But short answer is no. Everyone needs a will.
Good point. Good point. And that's a whole other thing. Everybody needs a will. Folks, we're at 6:30. I told Lyndon he'd be free to go off and have his evening at 6 o'clock, and it's 6:30 now. So we'll certainly bring Lyndon back for another session. If your question didn't get answered, don't worry. We'll get to it. If you need to talk to Lyndon about incorporating family trusts, if you've got some tax things you want to talk about, you can reach him at our law firm, which is Field Law. And Lyndon Thiessen, Field Law. Look, there it is. It's the magic of technology. But Lyndon's email address. Lyndon, what is your email address? Where? I don't see it. Where does it say that? I don't see that. It doesn't say that on mine. Oh, it's in the banner that's scrolling. Sorry, Wayne. Sorry. Yeah, I'm a Luddite. Anyway, you can get in touch with Lyndon. Email him there. He's a wealth of information. We've got a ton of horsepower at Field. We can help you with family trusts. We can litigate the heck out of anybody suing you, or you want to sue somebody. Not that we recommend that, because we don't. We can handle that. We've got Aaron Burney, a condominium expert, who's going to come on and chat about bed bugs and evicting tenants and Airbnb in condominiums. We have just all the kinds of legal help that you could possibly want. So if you're getting in touch with Lyndon, you can ask him about other questions, or you can email me. You can chat with Donna. We'll make sure that you get the kind of legal help that you need. So, Lyndon, thank you very much for coming on and helping out. That was a fast hour and a half. It really went quickly, and I think we're going to have to do this again, because there's a lot of interest in this area. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me, Gary. Thanks, Donna, and thanks everybody. I had a great time. So
super.
Be safe.
And with that, we'll say